All right, folks, jumping right in. Big topic making waves right now. India's new interception rules for telecommunications.
Oh.
I know. You're probably thinking Big Brother, right?
It's a valid concern.
Oh, definitely. Especially, for our listeners out there aiming for the top UPSC ranks.
Mm.
It's essential stuff, ties into everything. Governance, tech, security, privacy, it's all there.
Absolutely. Got to look at the whole picture here. India's telecom sector is massive. I mean, huge EE, second largest globally, over 1.17 billion subscribers.
Whoa, that's a lot of people.
So these rules, anything governing that space, huge EE implications, no doubt.
Yeah, it's not just some abstract policy talk. This affects a ton of people. And it's a big shift, too, moving from that 2007 Rule 419A to a brand new framework for 2024.
Big changes.
So what's changed? Why should we care? Let's break it down.
Okay, first off, who can actually order these interceptions? They've streamlined that mainly to the Union Home Secretary and those state home department secretary.
Just more centralized.
Yeah. Could seem like a small tweak, but think about it. Potential impact on coordination, accountability, it's all connected.
That's a good point. More centralized. But does that mean less oversight then? What about those unavoidable circumstances they keep mentioning?
Right. That's where it gets, well, a bit more interesting. New rules let officers, at least joint secretary rank in the union government, issue those orders in specific situations. Like, think about it this way. You've got a security threat, right? But it's in some remote border area, nowhere near the usual channels. These rules give the government, that flexibility to act fast.
I see. So in a fast-moving situation, that could be crucial.
From a national security angle, yeah, could be essential.
Okay, but of course, more power, potentially more misuse,
Yeah.
right? What's there to actually prevent overreach?
Oh, absolutely. Safeguards are key. One big change is that 7-day confirmation rule. Any order has to be validated within a week. Otherwise, the data, useless, can't use it.
Feel like a time limit, make sure things don't drag on.
Adds a layer of urgency, accountability, could help curb any attempts to use those powers randomly or whatever.
Makes sense. Okay, so time limit. But what about the data that IS collected legally? What happens to that?
Another big shift, it's got to be destroyed every 6 months, unless there's a specific reason to keep it.
So they can't just hold on to it forever.
Right. Now, whether that's enough to deal with all the privacy concerns, debatable. But it is a move towards, being more transparent, better data security. And for all those UPSC folks out there, think about how this all links to those debates about the right to privacy, data protection laws, all that.
Oh, that's a great point. Especially for those essays and ethics papers. It's not just, memorizing the rules. It's about understanding the bigger picture, the debates, the ethical side of things. So we've talked about some positive changes, at least on paper. Where are the potential concerns?
Well, you compare these to the old 419A, there are some subtle shifts that, raise some eyebrows, like that emergent cases condition for interception, it's been relaxed. What used to be like a clear and present danger, now it's got this broader definition.
So it's easier to justify intercepting someone's communications. What would that look like in real life? I mean, help our listeners visualize this.
Imagine authorities think someone's involved in, activities they call anti-national, which, by the way, is a term that's pretty open to interpretation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
With these relaxed conditions, it's easier to authorize surveillance, could lead to a chilling effect on free speech, people being afraid to speak out,
Whoa, okay, yeah, that's something every UPSC aspirant needs to think about. Super insightful. But hold on, before we get too deep into that, who exactly can authorize these interceptions? Any changes there?
There's one key difference, specifically at the state level, in terms of who can issue these orders. Previously, no restriction on the number of officers at that inspector general rank. Now, it's just the head honcho, or the second most senior officer of the authorized agency.
So they're trying to, tighten the chain of command.
Seems that way, yeah. Harder for decisions to happen in isolation.
Interesting, but this whole topic is pretty sensitive, right? We're talking about privacy, a fundamental right.
Exactly. To really grasp what these changes mean, gotta understand the historical context. The power to intercept communications, it's not new. It goes all the way back to the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885.
Wow, that's before India's independence. Were there any safeguards back then? It seems like a totally different world when it came to privacy.
Initially, none. Zero. Zip. Wasn't until a big Supreme Court case in 1996, PUCL versus Union of India, that's the one. That's when they really started saying, hey, we need checks and balances on this power.
Okay, so a turning point.
The court said the right to privacy is paramount, right? Any intrusion, you gotta justify it, gotta be proportionate.
Right. So that judgment, that set the stage for the 2007 rules. And now, here we are. Another evolution in the legal landscape.
That's fascinating stuff.
So the question is, do these new rules actually address those concerns from all those years ago? Do they strike that balance between security and freedom? I need to unpack that more. But first, we're going to take a quick breather. We'll be back in a jiffy to dive deeper into all this, the safeguards, potential problems, what it all means for you, especially those aiming to ace the UPSC exams. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this with anyone who wants to stay informed. Knowledge is power, right?
Always. Okay, so picking up where we left off, million-dollar question, right? Do these new rules really get that balance right? National security and individual freedoms.
Yeah, the debate's been going on forever. These rules just make it even more complex. UPSC folks, this is like essay gold right here. Imagine you're asked to analyze these rules. How effective are they? Where do you even start?
You start with the safeguards, or at least what they're trying to do, right? We talked about that 7-day confirmation thing, the data destruction. Got to get rid of it. But when it comes to accountability, the rules aren't so clear.
Yeah, that's important.
Like, what happens if an agency goes too far, intercepts stuff without a good reason? What can someone do about it? It's not really spelled out.
That's a big point, right? Having rules is one thing,
Yeah.
but making sure they're actually followed. That's where it gets real. UPSC folks, you can really shine here, pointing out those gaps.
Exactly. And then there's that emergent case thing, remember? It's more flexible now, but that also means more room for potential problems. Gotta think critically here. Could this lead to even more surveillance, even when it's not really justified?
That's like trying to walk a tightrope, isn't it?
Hmm.
You need to give security agencies the tools to do their job, protect the country from real threats. But you don't want a system where anyone can be targeted just because of vague suspicions or because they disagree with the government.
Exactly. Gotta find that middle ground. And that's why that historical context is so important, like we talked about before. Remember that PUCL case? The Supreme Court, they didn't say no interceptions ever. They get it. Sometimes it's necessary. But they emphasize safeguards, gotta be proportional, can't go overboard.
Right. Those limits are crucial.
So how do these NW rules measure up against that? That's the kind of analysis a UPSC examiner wants to see, that deeper thinking.
Not just repeating the rules, you got to analyze them, critique them. You really understand the issue.
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting for anyone into tech and governance, remember. We were talking about satellite phones earlier.
Well, yeah. How do those even work anyway?
It's wild, right? They're completely different from your regular cell phone. They communicate directly with satellites up in space, intercepting those. Whole different ballgame.
So do these rules even apply to that kind of tech?
Good question. It highlights a bigger challenge. How do we balance security and privacy when tech is always changing faster than the laws can keep up?
It's like a never-ending game of catch-up.
You get rules for one thing and then bam, something new comes along and changes everything. Encrypted messages, virtual private networks, it's constant.
Feels like we're in uncharted territory here.
It's a global problem, not just in India.
This is why this conversation is so important, not just for UPSC folks, but for everyone. We're talking about the future of privacy in a digital world.
Can't ignore it.
Absolutely not. And remember, we're just scratching the surface here. We talked about satellite phones, but there's a whole universe of technology out there.
Impacts governance, security, privacy, the whole shebang.
The key takeaway: stay curious, keep learning, ask those questions.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, so we've thrown a lot of info at you. Let's get practical for a sec, especially for those UPSC exams coming up. Imagine this. You're in the exam hall. The question is about these new rules, how they impact individual freedoms. What do you do?
First, you show them, the rules, the key parts, how they change, those loopholes we talked about. But that's just the beginning.
All right, got to go beyond summarizing.
You analyze, you critique, you give those insights that show you really get it.
Like you've thought about it from different angles.
Exactly. Think about it from the perspective of law enforcement, right? They might say, we need these powers, got to deal with new threats, it's a dangerous world.
Makes sense. They have a job to do.
Then you got civil liberties groups, they're worried about misuse, about people's rights being eroded.
But yeah, two sides to every coin.
And the most important perspective, the everyday person, the one whose life could be turned upside down by these rules.
Oh, for sure. Got to remember the human impact.
That's what separates a good essay from a great one, showing you can handle those nuances, the complexity, all the different players involved.
It's not black and white. It's all those shades of gray in between.
Exactly. That's what critical thinking is all about.
So UPSC folks, listen up. This isn't just about memorizing stuff for an exam. It's about gaining the knowledge and the skills to navigate the real world, all its messiness. Becoming informed, engage citizens who can make a real difference.
And speaking of informed citizens, let's shift gears for a second. Look at a real-life story, something that shows how high the stakes can get with all this interception and surveillance stuff. This case, it involved a journalist reporting on some sensitive government stuff, their communications. Intercepted, and probably not for a good reason.
Oh, wow, this is getting serious.
This case, it blew up. Everyone was talking about it. It raised some serious questions about whether these powers are being used to silence people, to target those who criticize the government. And for our UPSC peeps, this is a gold mine. It's got everything. Freedom of the press, privacy, limits on government power, the role of the courts in protecting our rights.
It shows how these legal concepts, they're not just abstract ideas, they have real consequences for real people.
And for those who want to work in the government and the IAS or whatever, this stuff is crucial. Got to understand it inside and out.
Absolutely. And this case, it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
The judgment, it had a huge impact on how we interpret privacy and government surveillance. Landmark decision. Every UPSC aspirant should know it backwards and forwards.
So let's wrap up key takeaways from our deep dive into these new interception rules. We covered a lot, from the technical stuff to the bigger picture, how it affects governance, tech, our rights as individuals.
We saw how these rules make it easier to authorize interceptions, maybe more efficient, but also more questions about accountability, potential for misuse.
And we talked about history, how these rules fit into the bigger story of interception in India.
From way back in the colonial days to those landmark court cases that shaped how we think about privacy.
But the biggest takeaway, gotta think critically. These rules, they're not perfect.
They've got good points and bad points. It's up to us, informed citizens, especially future leaders, to analyze them, debate them, and ultimately help shape how they're used.
It's not about memorizing for an exam. It's about understanding how law, technology, and society all come together.
It's about those analytical skills, breaking down complex problems, forming your own opinions.
And remember, this is just the start. The world's changing fast. Tech is moving at warp speed.
To keep up, to be effective leaders and engaged citizens, got to be lifelong learners, questioning everything, exploring, pushing the boundaries of what we know.
So to all our listeners, UPSC folks especially, keep digging deep, keep asking those tough questions. Never stop learning. Knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
And hey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Share this with anyone who wants to learn with us. Until next time, stay curious.
Welcome back. All right, before we wrap up all this talk about India's new interception rules, let's look closer at that real-life story, the case I mentioned. It involved a journalist. They were reporting on some, well, sensitive government stuff. And guess what? Their communications intercepted.
Probably not for a good reason either, right?
But most likely not. This case, it really caught everyone's attention.
Oh yeah, it blew up.
It sparked this huge debate, about whether these powers could be used to silence dissent, to target people who are, critical of the government.
Basically, if you speak out, you could be spied on.
Yeah, scary thought. And for those prepping for the UPSC, this case is like pure gold. It's got it all. Freedom of the press, the right to privacy, limits on government power. And the courts, what's their role in all this? Upholding fundamental rights.
It's a real-world example of how these legal ideas, they can have a huge impacts on people's lives.
Not just some theoretical stuff. This is the real deal.
And for those who want to work in the government, the IAS, all that, this is essential knowledge.
Absolutely. This case, it went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Perfectly.
And the judgment, it changed everything, how we think about privacy, government surveillance, the whole thing. A landmark decision. Every UPSC aspirant should know it inside and out.
Okay, so let's wrap things up. Key takeaways from our deep dive into these interception rules. We've been through a lot. The technical stuff, the bigger picture, how it affects everything. Governance, technology, our own individual rights.
Right. We saw how these rules, they make it easier to authorize interceptions, streamline things, could be more efficient, but also got to be careful. That potential for misuse, can't ignore that.
And we talked about history, how these rules fit into the bigger story of interception in India.
Going all the way back to the colonial period.
Oh, it's been a long journey.
And those big Supreme Court cases, they shaped how we think about privacy today.
So we've come a long way.
But the most important thing, critical thinking. Got to use those brains. These rules, like anything else, they're not perfect.
Nothing ever is.
They have good points, bad points, and it's up to us, informed citizens, future leaders, to really think about them, analyze them, debate them.
Don't just take things at face value.
And ultimately to help shape how these rules are used in the real world.
Exactly. It's not about memorizing stuff for an exam. It's about understanding the bigger picture. how law, technology, society, it all comes together.
It's about having those analytical skills, breaking down complex problems, forming your own opinions, not just parroting what others say.
And remember, this is just the beginning. The world is changing so fast. Tech is advancing like crazy.
To keep up, to be effective leaders, engaged citizens, we gotta be lifelong learners, always questioning, exploring, pushing those boundaries.
So, to all our listeners, UPSC folks especially, keep digging deep, keep asking those tough questions, never stop learning. Knowledge is power. Never forget that.
Absolutely.
And hey, before we go, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, share this with everyone who wants to learn with us. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring.